I never thought pretending could feel this real. It started as a joke, a cover-up, just something to get people off our backs. But then, somewhere between the fake smiles and the borrowed hand-holding, she treated me in ways no man ever did. She listened when I spoke. She cared when I stayed quiet. She remembered the little things I never thought mattered. And while the world believed we were only playing along, my heart began to wonder, what if this was the love I'd been searching for all along? I used to tell myself I had no expectations left when it came to love. After all the failed relationships, the lies, the careless hands of men who swore they cared but only showed me how disposable I was, I had built walls so high around my heart I thought no one would ever climb over them. I told myself it was better that way, better to be alone than to be broken over and over again. I walked through my days carrying that quiet weight, a heaviness I could never quite explain to anyone. It wasn't that I didn't want to be loved, it was that I didn't believe love could exist for me without pain attached to it. When I met her, I never imagined she would be the one to unravel all of that. At first, she was just another face, another voice in the crowd, someone I never thought I'd even share a secret with, let alone a story that would change the entire way I looked at love. It all started casually, almost carelessly. I don't even remember who suggested it first, maybe me, maybe her. We were at this gathering, surrounded by people who always had questions about why I was still single, why she was always on her own, why we hadn't settled down yet like everyone else seemed so eager to do. The whispers, the glances, the unspoken judgment hanging in the air, it was exhausting. Somewhere between rolling our eyes and exchanging tired smiles, the idea came up, why don't we just fake it? Pretend we're dating. That way people would leave us alone, stop poking at wounds we didn't want to open. I laughed when I said it, thinking she'd brush it off, but instead she leaned in, a spark of mischief in her eyes, and said, why not? At first, I thought it would just be a silly act. A couple of staged smiles here, a little hand-holding when someone was watching, maybe a post or two online to convince the world we were more than we really were. It was supposed to be easy, light-hearted, something temporary. But as I walked home that night, I couldn't stop replaying the look in her eyes when she agreed. It wasn't just amusement, it was understanding. Like she saw the exhaustion behind my laugh, the loneliness I tried to hide, the ache of never feeling enough for anyone. For the first time, I felt like someone saw straight through me without me saying a word. The first days of our little arrangement felt strange, almost uncomfortable. I had held hands before, but when her fingers slid into mine, it felt different. It wasn't clammy or rough, it wasn't careless or forced. She held me like she was holding something she didn't want to break, gentle but sure, steady in a way I wasn't used to. When we posed together in front of friends, I expected to feel awkward, to feel like an actress in a play I didn't want to star in, but instead, I felt oddly safe. I caught myself relaxing in her presence, my laughter coming more easily, my smile lingering longer. And every time I pulled away, my hand missed hers. The strangest part was how quickly she paid attention to the little things. She noticed when I was tired even before I admitted it. She remembered the way I liked my coffee without me asking. She listened to me complain about something small, and instead of dismissing it the way men always had, she nodded, she validated, she cared. It felt strange at first, almost uncomfortable to be treated that way. I had been conditioned to believe that I was asking too much whenever I wanted tenderness, that I was difficult whenever I wanted to be heard. But with her, it wasn't difficult. It wasn't too much. She just did it, naturally, without hesitation, without expectation, and yet, I kept telling myself it was fake. That it wasn't real, that I couldn't allow myself to fall into this softness, because if I did, I'd only end up hurt again. Still, I couldn't deny how she made me feel. Every time she leaned close and whispered a joke into my ear, every time she touched the small of my back as we walked into a room together, every time she looked at me like I was worth the attention she gave so freely, I felt something shift inside me. Something I hadn't felt in years. Something I wasn't ready to admit out loud, not even to myself. Nights were the hardest. I would lie in bed replaying the day, every smile, every laugh, every tiny act of kindness. I would remember the sound of her voice, soft and teasing, or serious and warm, and it would echo in my chest long after the room had gone quiet. I kept asking myself why it felt so different, why her presence felt like a balm to wounds I thought would never heal. Maybe it was because she had nothing to prove, no ego to inflate, no control to exert. She wasn't trying to own me, she was trying to know me. And the more I let her in, even in this pretend way, the more I realized how deeply I had starved for this kind of love all along. I didn't know where this would lead, and I told myself not to think too far ahead. But even in those early days, before I dared to name what I was feeling, I knew one thing for certain. In all the years I had spent searching for love, bending myself to fit into the arms of men who never truly held me, I had never once been treated the way she treated me, not even when we were only pretending. And that terrified me more than anything else, because part of me already knew, if this was fake, then I didn't want to know what real was supposed to feel like. The first time we went out together as part of our little arrangement, I thought my nerves would give me away. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, just us showing up somewhere together, holding hands, smiling like we belonged to each other. I told myself it was all for appearances, that it was no different than wearing an accessory to complete an outfit. But the moment she slipped her hand into mine and gave it a small squeeze, I felt my chest tighten. Her touch wasn't performative. It wasn't stiff or awkward. It was gentle, warm, and certain, like she had been holding my hand for years and knew exactly how to make it feel right. I walked beside her in silence, trying to calm the storm inside me, pretending to focus on anything other than the way her thumb brushed across the back of my hand as if to remind me she was there. People around us bought the act instantly. They teased us, asked questions, threw playful comments our way, and we both played along with smiles and laughter. To them, it was just a show, and to me, it was supposed to be the same. But I couldn't ignore how it felt to be looked at like I mattered to someone. Every time she leaned into me, every time her voice softened when she called me babe in front of others, I caught myself wishing it wasn't pretend. I didn't expect her to care about the small details of keeping up the illusion, but she did. When someone asked about how we met, she jumped in smoothly, weaving a story that sounded so natural even I believed it for a second. She remembered things I had mentioned once in passing, like my dislike for a certain kind of food or the way I hated crowded places, and used them to make our story sound believable. It amazed me, because no one had ever paid that kind of attention to me before. With men, I always had to repeat myself, beg to be heard, remind them of who I was and what I liked. With her, it was like she had memorized me without even trying. That evening, as we walked back, I laughed at how convincing we must have seemed. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just convincing because we played the part well. It was convincing because she made me feel safe enough to forget it was fake in the first place. Days turned into weeks, and soon our fake dating became second nature. Holding her hand didn't feel staged anymore. Letting her put her arm around me in public didn't feel like acting. The little pet names she called me slipped out so easily that I stopped hearing them as lies. And every time she smiled at me, I felt something pull inside me, something I wasn't brave enough to name. At night, when I thought about the way she treated me, I caught myself comparing it to every relationship I'd had with men. The difference was staggering. With them, I was an option, someone who had to fight for scraps of affection, who had to prove my worth again and again. With her, I was enough without asking. She didn't wait until I broke down to offer care, she noticed before the cracks even showed. She asked how I was doing and meant it. She made space for my silence and didn't punish me for it. She laughed at my jokes like they mattered. She gave me a kind of presence I had never experienced before, the kind that made me feel like my existence alone was valuable. There were little moments that began to etch themselves into my heart. One day, I wasn't feeling well, and instead of brushing it off or telling me to push through, she showed up with tea and medicine, no questions asked. She sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on mine, her voice calm and steady as she told me I didn't have to explain anything. Another time, we were out with friends, and someone made a dismissive comment about me. Before I could even laugh it off like I usually did, she stepped in, her tone firm but not unkind, making it clear that I wasn't a joke to her. I remember sitting there, stunned, realizing no one had ever defended me like that before. Men in my past had either joined in the laughter or stayed silent, but she made sure I knew I was worth standing up for. That moment stayed with me longer than it should have. The hardest part was pretending it didn't affect me. I kept telling myself this was all an act, that she was simply good at playing the role we had agreed on. But when she looked at me with that kind of tenderness in her eyes, it was impossible not to wonder if there was something more. At night, lying in bed, I would think about how natural it felt to lean on her, how easily she seemed to carry the parts of me I had always hidden. I had been in relationships where I gave everything and received nothing in return, where I lost myself trying to keep someone else happy. But with her, I felt seen in ways I never thought possible. It scared me because it made me question everything I thought I knew about love. It made me wonder if I had been searching in all the wrong places all along. The strangest part was how quickly my body began to betray me. My heart would race whenever she touched my shoulder or brushed a strand of hair out of my face. My stomach would flip when she leaned in too close, her perfume filling the space between us. And every time she laughed, genuinely laughed, I felt my chest swell with something I couldn't contain. I tried to push it away, to remind myself it was all pretend, but the truth was unavoidable. I was starting to feel something real in the middle of a lie. And yet, I kept quiet, because I was terrified of ruining the fragile thing we had built. Terrified that if I confessed, I'd lose the one person who had made me feel more cared for in a few weeks than anyone else ever had in years. So I held it in. I smiled, I played along, I let the world believe we were together while inside me, a storm was brewing. And as much as I tried to deny it, every day with her pulled me deeper into something I didn't want to escape. Because whether it was fake or not, the way she treated me was real. And that was enough to both heal me and break me at the same time. The more time we spent together, the more the lines began to blur. What once felt like play acting, a casual arrangement to protect ourselves from questions and judgment, slowly became a part of my daily rhythm. I would wake up in the morning and find myself smiling at the thought of seeing her, my mind drifting to what she might say, what she might do, how her laugh would sound when I teased her about something small. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. I wasn't supposed to wait for her messages like they were the highlight of my day. I wasn't supposed to feel the warmth that spread through my chest when she looked at me as if I were the only person in the room. But it was happening, and the harder I tried to deny it, the more undeniable it became. We began to share more of ourselves beyond the act. Long conversations stretched into the night, hours that passed unnoticed as we opened up about our fears, our dreams, the little things that made us who we were. She listened with a patience I had never known, never rushing me, never dismissing me. There were nights when I found myself confessing things I hadn't told anyone, things I had carried silently for years. I spoke of my past relationships, of how empty I had felt giving love to people who only saw me as a convenience. I admitted how tired I was of chasing affection that was never freely given. She didn't interrupt, she didn't pity me, she just listened, and when she finally spoke, her words were soft and grounding. She told me I deserved more than what I had been given, that love should never feel like a battle to win. Those words lingered with me long after the conversation ended, carving out a place in my heart I didn't know was still open. We laughed together too, in a way that felt almost reckless. She had a way of making the simplest things feel extraordinary. A grocery run turned into a comedy show as she made faces at me across the aisle, pretending to argue over brands like it was life or death. A rainy evening that might have felt lonely in the past became an adventure as we walked under one umbrella, her arm wrapped firmly around me as though keeping me close was second nature. I began to crave those small moments, the ones that felt ordinary on the surface but left me with a glow that lasted long after. They were reminders that life didn't have to be grand gestures to feel meaningful. It could be in the laughter that echoed through a quiet kitchen, or the way she hummed softly when she thought I wasn't paying attention, but even as joy grew between us, so did my fear. Late at night, lying awake in the silence, I would replay the way she looked at me, the way her hand lingered on mine, the way her voice softened when she said my name, and I would wonder if I was reading too much into it. What if this was just her way of being kind? What if she didn't feel the same way, and I was building castles out of air? I had been here before, in situations where I gave too much of myself and was left with nothing. The thought of losing her, even as a friend, was unbearable. So I kept my feelings locked inside, hiding them behind jokes and smiles, terrified that if I revealed the truth, the fragile bond between us would shatter. Still, the bond only deepened. One evening, after a long day, I broke down unexpectedly. The weight of everything I had been carrying, the memories of being undervalued, the constant battle with self-doubt, the fear of not being enough, came crashing down. I tried to hide it, brushing away tears before she could see, but she noticed anyway. She always noticed. Without hesitation, she pulled me close, her arms wrapping around me with a strength that didn't suffocate but instead made me feel safe, secure. She didn't say much, just held me as though I didn't have to explain myself, as though my pain was valid without justification. I couldn't remember the last time someone had held me like that, without expectation, without impatience. It made me realize how deeply she had already become a part of my healing. After that night, something changed between us. The silences we shared became more meaningful, less about words and more about presence. I started catching myself staring at her, memorizing the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the way she absent-mindedly played with her sleeve when she was nervous, the way she carried herself with quiet confidence. I felt my heart swell with emotions I was too afraid to name, emotions that felt bigger than me, bigger than the arrangement we had agreed on. And the scariest part was knowing that no man had ever made me feel this way. I had been in relationships that were supposed to be real, yet none of them came close to the depth of what I was feeling now in the middle of something that was supposed to be faked. I didn't know how long I could keep pretending it was all an act. I didn't know if she noticed the way I lingered when our hands brushed, or how my laughter came a little too easily when she teased me. I didn't know if she felt the same electricity in the air when our eyes met and held for a little too long. All I knew was that I was falling, quietly and deeply, and every day it became harder to convince myself this was just a game. My heart was no longer interested in pretending. It wanted something real, even if my fear told me it wasn't safe to ask for it, and so I lived in that quiet contradiction, pretending on the outside, unraveling on the inside. Every gesture, every word, every moment with her pulled me deeper into a reality I couldn't escape. I knew it was only a matter of time before something would break, before either my silence would suffocate me or my truth would set me free. But for now, I held on to the fragile beauty of what we had, because even if it wasn't meant to last, it was the closest thing to love I had ever known. It was in the little things that everything began to shift, in the moments that should have been ordinary but somehow carried the weight of something much bigger. I caught myself staring at her longer than I should, memorizing the way her lips curved when she smiled, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about something she loved, the way her laughter seemed to ripple through the air and settle warmly in my chest. I would watch her talk to others and feel a pang of something I didn't want to name, something that made me want to hold her hand and keep her close, as if the world might try to steal her away from me. These feelings were no longer whispers in the background, they were growing louder, insistent, demanding to be acknowledged. And the more I tried to ignore them, the more they consumed me. Our closeness became something neither of us questioned anymore. When we were together, her arm would find its way around my shoulders without hesitation, my hand would slip into hers as though it belonged there, and our conversations flowed effortlessly between playful banter and vulnerable confessions. It didn't feel like pretending anymore, and that was the problem. I found myself holding on to moments longer than I should, letting my hand linger against hers, letting my gaze rest on her face even when she wasn't looking. I could feel the line between fake and real dissolving, and with it came a tension that filled the air between us. There was a night when we went to a small cafe, tucked away from the noise of the city. The lights were soft, the music low, and we sat across from each other sipping warm drinks. It should have been simple, casual, but the way she looked at me across the table made my heart stutter. She asked me about my day, but not in the absent-minded way most people do. She wanted to know everything, what had frustrated me, what had made me smile, what thoughts had lingered with me. She leaned forward, chin resting on her hand, listening with an intensity that made me feel like my words mattered. And when I faltered, when I stumbled trying to explain something that didn't quite make sense, she didn't laugh or dismiss me. She waited patiently, her eyes never leaving mine, and in that moment, I realized how deeply she valued not just my presence, but the very essence of who I was. No one had ever done that for me before. I tried to bury the warmth I felt, tried to swallow down the ache that was growing inside me, but it was impossible. Every part of her drew me in. The way she remembered details I didn't even recall telling her, the way she always made space for my feelings, the way she could make me laugh even when I didn't want to. She treated me with a care that felt too rare, too precious, and I didn't know how to hold it without breaking. At night, when I lay in bed, I would replay these moments over and over, my heart pounding as I whispered into the darkness that I couldn't fall for her, that it was too dangerous. But the truth was already written all over me, and no amount of denial could erase it. The hardest part was the way my body betrayed me in her presence. When she hugged me, I felt a rush of electricity that lingered long after her arms left mine. When her fingers brushed against my skin, it was like a spark leapt between us, small but impossible to ignore. I would find myself yearning for her touch, craving the moments when she would lean close and whisper something only for me. And then came the glances, the way our eyes would meet and hold, longer than they should, filled with something neither of us dared to speak aloud. In those silences, I felt the truth hanging between us, heavy and undeniable, but neither of us crossed the line. Not yet. One evening, we were walking home together, the night quiet around us, streetlights casting soft pools of light on the pavement. She was telling me a story, something funny that had happened at work, and I was laughing, but then she looked at me and the words seemed to fade from her lips. For a moment, we just stood there, the silence stretching, her eyes searching mine as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure she could hear it. I wanted to reach out, to close the distance, to finally let everything spill out, but fear froze me in place. Instead, I smiled too quickly, breaking the tension with a joke, pretending not to notice the way her expression softened before she turned back to the path. That night, I lay awake wondering what would have happened if I hadn't pulled away. If I had been brave enough to let the truth show, would she have met me halfway? Or would I have shattered the fragile bond between us? The not knowing was torture, a constant push and pull between desire and fear. But what I did know was that every day, every shared moment, every lingering touch was pulling me deeper into something I couldn't escape. I began to realize that I was falling in love with her. Not the kind of love I had known before, the desperate clinging to men who saw me as replaceable, the endless compromises that left me hollow. This was different. This was slow and steady, filled with laughter and safety, built on respect and care. It was the kind of love that didn't demand I shrink myself but instead allowed me to be more of who I was. And that realization was both beautiful and terrifying, because once I admitted it to myself, I knew there was no going back. Every time she looked at me, every time she reached for my hand, every time she reminded me in 100 small ways that I mattered to her, I felt the truth pressing harder against my chest. I was falling, and there was no pretending anymore. The only question that remained was whether she was falling too, or whether I was alone in this fragile, dangerous, beautiful secret. It happened on a night that began quietly, without expectation, just the two of us sitting together in the small cocoon we had created for ourselves. The world outside felt distant, unimportant, while inside the walls of that room there was only the sound of her voice and the comfort of her presence. I had been carrying the weight of my feelings for so long that they had become a storm inside me, a storm I could no longer contain. Every laugh, every glance, every gentle touch had piled onto my chest until I could barely breathe from holding it all in. That night, I knew something would break, though I didn't know if it would leave me freer or emptier than before. We had been talking about nothing and everything, the way we often did, our words meandering from trivial jokes to the pieces of ourselves we rarely showed the world. She sat close to me, our knees brushing, her hand resting absent-mindedly on the couch between us. I kept glancing at it, at the way her fingers tapped softly as she spoke, and I wanted so badly to take that hand in mine, to hold it in a way that would say everything I couldn't. My heart pounded with the effort of restraint, but my body betrayed me. I shifted closer without thinking, our shoulders brushing, and when she turned to look at me, the air between us shifted. Her gaze lingered, heavy and searching, as though she could see the words I had been swallowing for weeks written across my face. I broke first. The silence grew too loud, my fear too suffocating. My voice trembled when I said her name, and when she answered softly, it undid me. I told her I couldn't keep pretending anymore, that somewhere along the way I had stopped acting and started feeling, that every touch and every word had become too real for me to dismiss. My chest burned with the weight of confession, tears pricking my eyes as I admitted that no man had ever made me feel the way she did, that her kindness, her patience, her unwavering care had shown me a love I hadn't believed existed. I told her I was terrified of losing her, terrified of misreading everything, terrified of ruining the best thing that had ever happened to me, but even more terrified of living with the truth locked inside me. For a moment, she didn't speak, and the silence wrapped around me like a noose. I wanted to take it back, to laugh and brush it off as a joke, but I couldn't. I sat there, raw and trembling, waiting for her to pull away. Instead, she reached out and touched my hand, gently at first, as if giving me a chance to retreat. When I didn't, her fingers curled around mine, steady and sure. Her eyes softened, and in them I saw something that made my breath catch. She told me she hadn't been pretending either. That from the very beginning, even when it was just supposed to be for show, she had felt something real. She admitted that she had been afraid too, that she hadn't wanted to push me, hadn't wanted to risk losing me, but that every moment with me had only deepened what she already knew. She cared for me in ways she had never cared for anyone else. Her words washed over me like light breaking through clouds after a storm. Relief and disbelief tangled inside me as I tried to process what she was saying. I searched her face, desperate to know if this was real, if I wasn't dreaming, and she only smiled softly, as if to reassure me. Then she leaned closer, her forehead resting against mine, her breath warm as she whispered that I deserved to be loved, not halfway, not conditionally, but fully, and she wanted to be the one to love me that way. My tears fell then, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming release of years of longing, years of being unseen, years of believing I would never know this kind of love. The moment we finally kissed was nothing like I had imagined. It wasn't rushed or dramatic, it wasn't the kind of kiss that belongs in a movie. It was gentle, tentative at first, as though we were both afraid to break the fragile truth we had just uncovered. But as her lips pressed against mine, soft and certain, all the walls I had built around myself crumbled. I felt myself melt into her, every fear dissolving into the warmth of that connection. It wasn't just a kiss, It was a promise, a beginning, a declaration without words that what we shared was real. When we pulled away, our foreheads still touching, I realized that the fear hadn't disappeared entirely. I was still afraid of what others might say, of how the world might treat us, of stepping into an unfamiliar love that went against everything I had been taught to expect. But in that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was the way she looked at me, as though I was worthy of every ounce of love she had to give. What mattered was the way my heart, for the first time in years, felt at peace instead of at war with itself. That night, as we sat together in the quiet, hands intertwined and hearts laid bare, I knew that everything had changed. The pretending was over. What we had now was fragile but real, and it was more than I had ever dared to hope for. I had finally spoken the truth, and in return, I had been given something I never thought I'd find, someone who saw me, someone who chose me, someone who loved me not despite who I was, but because of it. The days that followed felt like stepping into a new world, one where everything looked familiar yet carried a different weight, a deeper meaning. The way she held my hand in public no longer felt like a performance, but a declaration. The way she leaned into me when we walked, the way her laughter spilled so easily around me, the way her eyes found mine across a room, it all felt like pieces of a truth we had been building without even realizing. But along with the sweetness of discovery came a heaviness I hadn't expected. Loving her openly, even in small ways, carried a risk that pressed against the back of my mind, whispering warnings of judgment, rejection, and the possibility that people wouldn't understand what we had. That fear sat with me like a shadow, and yet, every time I looked at her, every time I felt her warmth beside me, I knew it was a risk worth taking. There was a morning when we sat on her balcony, sipping coffee as the sun rose over the city. She tucked her legs under herself, her sweater sliding off one shoulder, her hair messy in a way that made her look even more beautiful. I couldn't stop staring at her, my heart swelling with a mix of awe and disbelief that she was mine, that this was real. She noticed, of course, she always noticed, and with a soft smile she asked what I was thinking. I wanted to tell her everything, how she made me believe in love again, how she made me feel safe in a world that had always demanded I hide parts of myself, how every day with her felt like a gift I didn't deserve. But the words caught in my throat, too big to fit into a single sentence, so instead I whispered, "You make me feel alive," and she reached across the table, squeezing my hand as if to say she felt the same. Not everyone shared our happiness. When word began to spread among friends and acquaintances, the reactions were mixed. Some were supportive, quick to smile and congratulate us, but others raised eyebrows, whispered behind our backs, or offered tight-lipped responses that carried more judgment than kindness. One of my closest friends, someone I had trusted for years, distanced herself almost immediately. She claimed she needed time to process, but her absence spoke louder than her excuses. It stung more than I wanted to admit, and there were nights when I lay awake replaying her words, wondering if I had made a mistake by being honest about us. But then I would feel her arm wrap around me in the dark, her lips pressing softly against my temple, and the doubts would quiet. She was my anchor in those moments, reminding me that the love we shared was not something to be ashamed of, no matter who chose to walk away. The hardest part came when my family found out. I had spent my whole life trying to fit into the mold they expected of me, pretending my relationships with men were enough, pretending I was happy living within the lines they had drawn. Admitting the truth to them felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall would hurt but unable to keep holding on to the ledge. Their reaction was colder than I had feared. My mother's silence cut deeper than any words could, my father's disappointment hung in the air like a heavy cloud, and the few relatives who spoke up did so only to tell me I was throwing my life away. It was as if the love I had finally found, the love that made me feel whole, was invisible to them simply because it didn't fit their expectations. I left that house feeling smaller than I had in years, my chest tight with grief and anger, but when I told her what happened, she didn't try to fix it with empty reassurances. She didn't tell me it didn't matter, because she knew it did. Instead, she pulled me into her arms and let me cry, her hand steady on my back, her voice gentle as she whispered that she wasn't going anywhere. "Let them take their time," she said softly. "We'll build our own family if we have to." And in that moment, I realized that love wasn't always about grand gestures or perfect words. It was about showing up, standing beside someone when the world turned its back, holding on even when it was hard. The more challenges we faced, the more I saw the strength of what we had. It wasn't just passion or infatuation, it was resilience. It was choosing each other every day, even when things got messy. We laughed louder together in the quiet moments, we leaned on each other in the painful ones, and slowly, the fear that had haunted me began to fade. I stopped worrying so much about who was watching, who was whispering, and started focusing on the simple truth that had carried us this far. She loved me, and I loved her. That was enough. There was one evening, late and unplanned, when we found ourselves dancing in the kitchen. The music was barely audible from a speaker on the counter, but she pulled me into her arms anyway, swaying gently as the room filled with the smell of dinner we had forgotten on the stove. I rested my head against her shoulder, closing my eyes as I let myself sink into the rhythm of us. For the first time in my life, I wasn't pretending. I wasn't chasing someone who couldn't love me back. I wasn't shrinking myself to fit into someone else's expectations. I was here, in her arms, and it was enough. More than enough. It was in that moment I understood something I had never fully grasped before, that love wasn't supposed to hurt, it wasn't supposed to make you feel small or unwanted. Love, real love, was supposed to feel like this. Like safety, like home, like a light you never wanted to lose. And even though the world outside might not understand, even though there would still be battles to fight, I knew deep down that this was worth every risk. Because for the first time I was not only loved, but truly seen. The night the weight of everything finally lifted was not marked by fireworks or a grand gesture, but by a quiet, ordinary evening that somehow carried the fullness of all we had endured. We were sitting on the floor of her living room, surrounded by scattered blankets and half-eaten snacks, the remains of a day spent entirely in each other's company. The air was soft, the kind of silence that came not from emptiness but from comfort, from two hearts that no longer needed to fill every space with words. I leaned against her, my head resting against her shoulder, and as she absent-mindedly ran her fingers through my hair, I felt something inside me settle. For months, my heart had been a battlefield, between fear and desire, hope and doubt, but in that simple moment, with her arms around me and the world outside fading into irrelevance, I realized that the war was over. I was where I was meant to be. Looking back, I could see how far we had come, how much of ourselves we had laid bare along the way. What had started as a game, a facade we thought we could control, had unraveled into the most honest connection I had ever known. I remembered the first time I admitted my feelings, the trembling in my voice, the terror of losing her. I remembered the sting of rejection from friends, the cold silence of family, the weight of society's gaze pressing down on us. But I also remembered her unwavering presence through it all, the way she held me when I broke, the way she laughed with me when I needed joy, the way she never once made me feel like I had to earn her love. She had given it freely, and that in itself was revolutionary to me. There was a time when I thought love meant bending myself into shapes that pleased someone else, silencing my needs, settling for scraps of affection because I believed that was all I deserved. Every relationship I had before her had taught me to shrink, to hide, to accept less than I gave. But she had shown me something different. She had treated me better than any man ever did, not because she was trying harder or because she had to prove something, but because loving me was natural to her. It wasn't forced, it wasn't conditional, it was steady, patient, and real. She taught me that love wasn't about how much pain you could endure for someone, but about how safe you could feel with them. As I thought about everything we had faced, the fear of losing family, the sting of judgment, the ache of letting go of old friendships, I realized that all of it had brought me here, to a love that was worth every sacrifice. It wasn't easy, and it never would be, but it was ours, and that was enough. More than enough. I turned to her then, watching the soft light play across her face, and I felt a swell of emotion so strong it nearly knocked the air out of me. I whispered that she had changed me, that she had given me back parts of myself I thought were gone forever, and that no matter what the world said, I would choose her again and again. Her eyes softened, and in them I saw the same truth reflected back at me. She told me that she never wanted to be the reason I hid, that if loving her meant standing against the world, then she would stand with me until the very end. That night, we fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, but it wasn't just sleep, it was a surrender to peace I had never known before. For once, I wasn't haunted by doubts or shadows of the past. I wasn't replaying old wounds or bracing myself for the next disappointment. I was simply present, my heart steady, my body safe, my soul finally at rest. I realized then that this wasn't just a love story, it was a story of survival, of reclaiming who I was meant to be, of finding light after years of darkness. It was about learning that love could be soft and strong at the same time, that it could heal as much as it could ignite. In the weeks and months that followed, we kept building a life together, not perfect, not without its struggles, but honest and full. There were days when the outside world tried to intrude, when cruel words or disapproving stares reminded us of the cost of living openly. But every time, we found our way back to each other, back to the small universe we had created where love was enough. We filled it with laughter, with late-night talks, with quiet mornings and unplanned adventures. We made mistakes, we argued, we stumbled, but through it all, we held on, and each time we did, we grew stronger. What stayed with me most, though, was the way she never stopped choosing me. Not just in the big, dramatic moments, but in the small, everyday ones. She chose me when she reached for my hand in a crowded place. She chose me when she listened to my fears without judgment. She chose me when she kissed me goodnight even after an argument, reminding me that our love was bigger than our pride. And I chose her, again and again, in the same ways, until choosing each other became less of a choice and more of a truth as natural as breathing. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything, I understand that this love isn't just about her and me, it's about what it means to be seen, to be valued, to be loved without conditions. It's about finding the courage to step out of the shadows and into a life that feels true. It's about realizing that love doesn't need to look like anyone else's to be real, that it doesn't need approval to be valid. What we have is ours, and it is beautiful because it is real, and though the journey here was not easy, though it was marked with pain and loss and fear, I would walk it all again if it meant finding her at the end. Because for the first time in my life, I am not pretending, not hiding, not settling. For the first time, I am fully loved, and I am finally home.